We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 135. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today, Paul and I assess how working from home has been for the last 5 months, and we talk about planning the tech and data collection on a massive CRM survey. Let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast. Paul, how's it going working from home?
It's interesting, let's say that. I was supposed to have some vacation time because we get a generous 4 weeks of vacation on staff at the school that I work, and we've been so busy with a variety of projects that I've had no vacation. Just for reference, it is now the middle of August. What is today, the 14th?
14th.
Yeah,
Yep.
So we're recording on the 14th. This is going to come out in about a week and a half. Oh, about a week. We're recording a little later than normal. And yeah, it's just been kind of crazy, brutal, getting things up to speed, get everybody in gear. And also we've taken on a lot of extra projects, partially because we have to and partially because we can. How's it been for you?
You know, busy. It's almost shockingly so, because I just read news articles about people unemployed and not having work. And I just, by luck of the draw, had put myself into a position that was already relatively secure with what I was doing on multiple fronts and already remote. So I really saw no slowdown. And in fact, just telling you before we started, I have so much that I have due like right now on multiple fronts, from archaeology to podcasting to some other things. And it's just like, there's not enough hours in the day, to be honest.
Right.
A lot of times now I work all the time. We have no kids, we have no pets, and I get paid for it in some cases, but like when I'm editing a client's podcast, sometimes we're just sitting down watching Netflix or something, and I've got my headphones in and I'm editing, and I'll usually watch my time on that one because I record my time, and maybe I'll knock 20 minutes off if I really am watching Netflix while I'm working on someone's podcast. You know, I want to be honest about the time there, but you know, I don't really consider that work, even though it is work. So normally I use my weekends for work as well. You know, I'll sit down in the morning or in the afternoon on a Saturday or Sunday and just catch up on some stuff for the week, right? Well, since we've been RVing for the past almost 2 months, in fact, it's a week shy of 2 months right now, we've been, I don't want to say moving every weekend, but we've been moving many weekends just because we had a lot of stuff we wanted to accomplish in this first stint out. And weekends are when we move, because I have like real client-based, time-based work during the week. And that's the only time I can do it. So Saturday and Sunday have really been drive days for us, where typically we'll spend the night, just one night someplace on a Saturday, and then check into the next park or whatever, campground on a Sunday, which has totally destroyed the time I used to have to do stuff on the weekend. I mean, I'll still wake up early in the morning because we won't leave until 9 or 10. So I'll get something done, but it's like the rest of the day. So we're back in Reno right now, though. We got here a few days ago and we're here for 3 weeks. So I'm sitting in my office, and these couple weeks, this could be the last podcast I record in this office. Although I think I'll do our next show from here, because we're going to be here another 2 weeks. So I think I'll make that. And then we're gone. We're packing everything up and heading on the road for, well, until next spring, depending on what we're going to talk about in a couple segments. So this is kind of a between guests episode. And along those lines, if you have a project or something you want to come talk to us about on the Archaeotech Podcast, then let's talk about it. You can find the link to schedule a recording under the schedule and interview text. It just produces a pop-up where you can access the calendar. And that's over at arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. And we've actually moved our recording day too. It was on Tuesdays. Now it's on Thursdays in the afternoon Pacific time. So check that out. Hopefully I've got my calendar all sorted out for that. I've got like 16 calendars I've got to adjust because of that adjustment. So what we wanted to talk about in this first segment, at least, is work from home. We did a lot of stuff early on in this COVID crisis, talking about different applications and different things you can do, you know, different video conferencing things to make working from home work. And not just working from home for anybody, but really for archaeologists, people in the field. What can you do? Well, we wanted to just kind of follow up with ourselves and see how that's been going. So, Paul, how about you? Because you normally didn't work from home before this. You normally, went in during the week to the school that you work at.
Yep.
how did the change go? And let me start by asking, are you guys going back? Because there's a lot of talk about that right now. Are students coming back? Or are you guys going virtual, or is there kind of a hybrid model there? And what's it mean for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's what everybody's asking right now, because there's been a lot of angst and anguish all around the country about what's happening with schools getting back in session. And, the discussion tends to pit the economy, national economy or local economies, against kids' education, against health, against childcare. All these things are interrelated, and it seems like you pull on one and you damage something else, and we don't societally really have good answers for these. Because I'm at an independent school, we have a certain amount of leeway. Certainly the schools, our peer schools, we all discuss amongst each other, trying to come up with similar plans or sharing our own ideas of what best practice are going to be. But nobody has done this before.
Right.
We're all flying kind of blind into this. We get the best advice we can from health officials, from researchers, from all sorts of different points of view. And we're trying to put together a plan that's going to work. Now, when I say we, I'm not in any way involved in putting together the plan. Because I work in IT, I'm basically involved in implementing as best as we can whatever plan somebody else comes up with.
Right.
But to answer your question, no, we are not going back to a in-person schooling scenario, but we are opening the doors to people who need to come in. And so that's kind of seen as an equity issue. And that's mostly the lens we're looking at it from, because not everybody has, a bedroom they can go close themselves in for 6-8 hours a day to do their work. Not everybody has good internet at home.
Right.
Some people have family environments that are unconducive for a variety of reasons to learning. And so they need to get away. So we want to provide a safe space for students to come. But we also want to limit the number of students and teachers, because inevitably it'll be some teachers who do come into the space, because we want to limit the opportunities for transmission. Now, we have a very tricky situation in our physical layout, and that we have a number of different buildings. We've got a few different buildings all on the Upper East Side of New York, but our main building is a 14-story building that in normal situations has about 1,000 people in it and 2 elevators.
Right.
And because of the layout of the building, the best place to have kind of co-working spaces that are going to be able to be set up to have good social distancing, those are on the top floor.
Of course.
So it's absolutely impractical to expect 1,000 people in the building on any given day using those 2 elevators when you can only get 2 people per elevator effectively socially distanced. Yeah,
totally.
Also, being in New York, we have this whole question. We don't want people coming in if they don't have to, because the primary way that most people come into school is on public transportation. And if you've seen any news reports, public transportation, especially on the subways, is way, way down, something like 80% versus what it was prior to COVID, so prior to the middle of March. So we're trying our best to accommodate people in the safest, most equitable, most nurturing way possible. But it's all brand new to us. And so I'll talk a little bit later maybe about some of the projects we've been doing in order to try to improve distance learning for people, but, and communications and a whole lot of other things. But yeah, to answer your question, we're going into kind of a primarily online mode with open doors for particular reasons for particular people.
Okay. That's an interesting model, because I follow the news a little bit, but obviously I'm not in the real community of people concerned with how schools are going back. I don't have kids, so it's just not one of the things I'm totally paying attention to, but I haven't heard in just the brief interactions and stuff I've seen of a model like that, where it seems to be like it's all or nothing, and where teachers are maybe going in just to have a place to broadcast from a classroom standpoint, mm-hmm. which makes sense, because if they don't have great internet home, if the source doesn't have good internet, then you're really in a world of hurt.
Yeah,
and so but allowing students to come in and providing that safe place, that's a really cool idea. And I would imagine. Well, I don't know, because you're at a private school, so people can probably come in from anywhere. They're probably not all within a few blocks of that school, I would imagine, because it is a private school, right?
That's correct. We have a lot of people. We're located in Manhattan, but we've got a lot of students who live in the Bronx or Brooklyn, and that is a commute, and that's a commute that requires subway travel.
Right.
And that's an issue.
Yeah, it's stuff I don't even think about, because I mean, there's so many people on those things. And I'm sure even while that kind of travel is down, it's probably rapidly increasing as businesses open up. But I don't know, New York's been kind of on the forefront of dealing with this whole thing. So maybe New Yorkers are...
We were kind of on the forefront of getting hit by the whole thing.
Well, which makes sense though, because you're New York, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're the most populous city in the United States and you routinely get people in from other countries. It's no surprise that it was huge there first.
Yeah, no, certainly.
What does this mean for you? I mean, do you have to, as sort of tech support, you really don't have a choice? You're going in every day?
Yeah. So for me, I think we had a session, an episode on, what we expected to come of. I think we gave it some jokey name, the zombie apocalypse or something early on. At this point, I still try to keep my humor about it all.
Yeah.
But it's harder to make jokes about it. Ever since mid-March, the way that we've worked, the school went entirely online. And we in the tech department opened up a Zoom room that we manned daily, 9 to 3:30, that people would just come in, our community members, so students, parents, faculty, staff. And we've basically maintained that. Since school finished in June, since the school year ended, we've been in that a lot just as a department. So we keep face-to-face, but because IT does often involve physical equipment, we have been going in. I've only been in a few times, but my coworkers in our department, there are 4 of us that primarily deal with tech, and the rest of our department primarily deals with integration. So, we're the ones that fix and break things, break and fix things. Sometimes, yes. We're the ones that keep the network running. We're the ones that keep the servers running. But, students took their laptops home and some of those broke. Mm-hmm. So they had to send them back to us to swap them for a fixed one so we can send the broken one back to Apple to get repaired. So we've had to manage that kind of a process. We had 108 seniors who graduated this past year. We needed to collect all of their laptops so that we can clean them, recategorize them in the database, and send them back out to, I can't remember which grade is getting those, 9th graders or 6th graders. But regardless, we have to cycle them through. And we have another grade as well that goes from one group of kids to a younger group of kids. So we have to have some sort of physical presence at the school. And in fact, I'm working on, because we're going to have this kind of hybrid approach going into the fall, I've just was working on with my coworkers, the 4 of us, a plan so that we can all be in the office 2 days a week and have one day that all 4 of us are the same day. And we think that'll limit our exposure, but also be able to let us work efficiently as a team. And so I'm just trying to work through the details of that. So we're going to see. It's really weird though. I mean, as opposed to you've been working principally remotely for a long time. I mean, yes, you do things that require physical presence. You can't survey, at least not with the technology we currently have, from the comfort of your home. You actually have to put on a backpack and go out in the field. But my work has been predominantly in person, in present, in the school building, and that has changed. So now it's been very heavily, as much as we can, trying to make analogs for what we used to do online, and then go in for what we absolutely can't move online. So it's interesting. I am not a big fan of it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's an adjustment.
It's a big adjustment. And for me, I'm a principal troubleshooter. I have a nose for when I see a problem, kind of figuring out what the parameters are, what the variables are, and what, coming up with tests so I can quickly get to the nub of the problem, and then we can work out a solution. And the best way that I come up with answers isn't sitting down and thinking through things by myself. It's sitting down, thinking through things by myself for a few minutes, and then go and explain what I thought through to one of my coworkers.
Right.
And they'll point out flaws in my thinking. They'll remind me of something that I overlooked. And sometimes just the act of speaking it out loud clarifies my own thought process. And that has really, really fallen apart. Yes, we are looking at each other on Zoom, but it's the fluidity of it is totally destroyed. And so that breaks down all the time for me. And it's exceedingly frustrating that any kind of problem solving takes much longer than it should, in my estimation, because it's so much different than it used to be.
And that's the facet of this that I'm most interested in, because one of the things I feel like that keeps, to an extent, I feel like it keeps our progress down as a human society, is our need for face-to-face interaction, right? I mean, you watch you watch science fiction and stuff like that, and there's people all over the universe, let's say, or the galaxy or the solar system or whatever thing that they're in, and they're communicating over large distances and they're solving problems and they're getting things done. And obviously that's fiction, and it's fiction for a reason, because it's really hard, and I think about conferences. I'm in talks with a few people to put on some more virtual conferences for archaeology. And if the only reason the conference exists is for people to present papers, then there's no reason why the virtual conference can't exist, right? Because there's no interaction anyway.
Right.
You typically can't even ask questions, but as you participated in the first one that we put on, there was a pretty robust question and answer period. I think twice we had it. And I think that worked out really well. And I don't think we were impeded by doing a virtual conference. Now, of course, at the end of the sessions, we couldn't all go have a drink at the bar and have those really fun conversations that we normally have. And those are very different in a Zoom call.
Yes.
So, partly because you can't even break off really quickly and have a side conversation with somebody else. Because most of the time it's not one person talking to 10 people standing around having a drink. It's 5 little side conversations happening, and they just kind of flow and organically change and move. And that is so difficult to replicate in this sort of environment.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That is that particular kind of environment, because it becomes one person dominating, lecturing, whatever, while everybody else goes, and then they take their turns to speak, as opposed to the more natural way, or more natural in that I've done it in my entire life, more natural to me way of exactly what you said. I'm in a group of 6 or 10 people, and I'm talking to 2 of them. And then we kind of talk to the rest of them. And then we break off and I'm talking to another one. And then it's messier. But that messiness is more comfortable to me, because that's how I've done it my entire life. And I don't get that through the Zoom calls.
And to be honest, it's easier to get out of a bad conversation too, because when your drink is empty, you can make an excuse to turn around and go back to the bar and hopefully come back and talk to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not drinking nearly enough when I'm at work.
Right. Yeah, indeed. All right, well, let's take a break and we'll come back and keep chatting about this in a second. Back in a minute. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code Archaeotech. That's ARCHAEOTECH.
College Savings Iowa is now iSave 529, and it can do more than take your child to college. It's their passport to a bright future, because funds can be used for K-12 tuition, trade schools, graduate degrees, books, and everything they need to get anywhere they want to go. Register by September 30th at iowa529contest.com for a chance to win a $5,290 contribution. iSave 529, for every child, for any adventure.
Welcome back to episode 135 of the Archaeotech podcast. And we are just doing a self-assessment of our work from home activities for the past, has it been like 4 months or something like that? March, April, May, June, July, August. It's like 5 months.
Jeez.
Yeah, jeez. I can't believe it. And it's not over too. I've seen plenty of articles that say, and this leads into what I wanted to talk about. I've seen plenty of articles that have said, in March and April, we were like, hey, we're gonna kick this in the butt over the summertime because heat, right? Everybody's like, well, quote, it's hot, so we'll kill a virus, because the common cold typically goes away in the summertime. Although just about everyone's probably been sick in the summertime at least once. I have heard other reports that say it's not necessarily the heat, but it's the lack of staying indoors and confined with each other that winter typically provides. You end up going outside.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not necessarily the heat that does it. But here's the problem. We were stuck inside for 2 months, and then summer hit, Memorial Day hit, and everybody crowded around each other on the beaches outside. Mm-hmm. And they're still doing it. And then there were no concerts, there were no sporting events, and now people are congregating to those things that are opening in limited capacities, but they're congregating to them. And it's almost like, it's like when you try to cut back the weeds in your lawn or something like that, you don't quite do it good enough, and they come back with a ferocity in like a month. I think that's what this has done. And I mean, there's been like 1,000 deaths a day in the past few weeks, a lot of them coming from Florida. And it's just like, man. And so we're quickly coming to a point where this is not going to be killed over the summertime, right? It's going to continue through the fall, more than likely get worse. The flu pandemic of 1918 got worse the following fall. You know, it kind of started in the winter, just like this one did. The following fall was their second wave. They're like legit second wave, and it was bad. And that's when most of the people died. So I think I hate to say it, but I think we're headed straight for that. The one benefit that we have is that there may be a vaccine between now and then, or at least maybe halfway through the year if the predictions are right. And hopefully that will start to nip this in the bud. But the point I'm making as it relates to this podcast, just to bring it back to the show, is we have to start getting used to what we're doing. You know, we have to. And do you think that's even possible, Paul? Especially you, like my work again. I mean, this podcast recording that we're doing, you know, sure, I did a lot of in-person podcast recordings with clients, but they quickly transitioned to podcasts just like we're doing. I'm in Nevada. You're in New York City. We've only met each other, I think, once in person. And yet we're able to still do this podcast every 2 weeks. And there's literally no problem with it, except for when I don't pay attention to my calendar and Paul's like, hey, you going to record?
That never happens.
Right?
That never happens this last Tuesday.
I think that happened twice this week.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, aside from that, you know, my other work with DoneSafe, that is inherently remote. You know, occasionally I've flown to a client, but that's usually for at least an initial onboarding and training or a post implementation and training. But that's pretty common. Is you fly to them, you help them do their training and develop a training plan. And it's just easier to spend a whole day with them and do that in person. Because if you set up a 2-hour call with a client and tell them, okay, spend the rest of your day, the next 6 hours going over this thing, they're not going to do that, right? They're done after the 2-hour call is over. So if you go there, a little more productive, but we haven't been able to do that either. And guess what? Still working out just fine. And everything's working okay. So how do we get the rest of the world, like your industry, you know, schools and things like that, just used to this kind of thing? Because I feel like everybody is dealing with it and not really coming up with solutions that are really good. They're just making their way through, hoping that it ends at any moment and they can go back to normal. And I think we need to think from an archaeological standpoint, from our work standpoint, we need to start thinking a little more long-term on stuff like this and how that's going to go. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And after that, I want to talk about project planning, because I'm dealing with COVID-19 stuff and trying to plan a project that's going to go on in 2 weeks. So we'll bring it back to that. But do you think there's a possibility that with this next semester where you're working, that people can kind of get used to this, or is everybody just expecting it to end at some point and go back to normal?
No, I don't think that, you know, the mood in and around the New York educational community is pretty pessimistic, at least amongst the people I've spoken to, in that we're all planning for it to start in some capacity and then have to get shut down by mid-November. And then everybody says, actually, I mean mid-October at the latest. And I feel the same way. I think that, you know, what you were talking about, everybody opening things up back on Memorial Day or the 4th of July and going out to parties and whatnot. And then we saw a spike in cases after that. I think that we're going to start seeing another spike. And you mentioned the second wave of the infection of 1918. And oh, geez, that really scares me, because I've been referring to our second spike or second wave already, talking about what happened in the summer as opposed to what happened in the late winter, early spring. But what if that really isn't the second wave? That was a ripple out from the hot spots like New York City out to the places that thought that they were okay, like Texas and Florida. And now we're going to see that ripple, just like on a pond, come back the other way. And I guess not like a pond, because it's going to increase, but then we're going to start seeing this amplified again, because people are going to be spending more time indoors because it's getting colder and more kids are at school and more people are going back to work. And so you're going to have more people concentrated and spreading the disease. Geez, I'm really worried about that. That's actually what I think is going to happen. But to your question about like how we're dealing with that as educators, for the most part, I don't think anybody's holding their breath that it's going to end anytime soon. And I think everybody expects that regardless of what happens, even if it does miraculously go away in, you know, a month from now, you know, it mutates in a funny way that makes it, you know, much less virulent. Even if that happens, we expect that there actually are a lot of lessons learned here from working online. And some things have transitioned quite well to online learning. And so we expect that we're probably going to have some kind of blended schooling system going forward, or systems, because we don't really have a unified schooling system in the country. And I think that that's actually probably what's going to happen as well. That, regardless of how long we're stuck socially isolating from people, even if COVID is licked, we're going to retain some sort of a blended system going forward. And there have been things that actually work in this remote environment. So, for example, I was having a meeting with some teachers and I asked them, how's it going for you? This was, a couple months ago while school was still on. And a teacher who's not especially technically savvy, but who teaches fourth graders said, you know what? For my fourth grade art class, it's so much easier. I said, how do you mean? She's like, one kid, the rambunctious kid in the class, can't monopolize the attention of the class. They can't disrupt everybody.
Yeah.
That compartmentalization of it, looking at that Brady Bunch grid of all of us on the computer screen actually works to the benefit of certain situations. And I thought that's interesting. I hadn't considered that because my dealing with that, even though I'm very happy to see my coworkers every time they pop into the Zoom, my experience with that has been really isolating and very much suboptimal. But, there are in certain situations good aspects. And I'm sure that that's just one example I can say anecdotally, but I'm sure that people are looking into this from a much broader perspective and finding things that actually do translate into this online world better than maybe would have expected.
Well, plus in the example of the fourth grade teacher in like a craft time, they're not saddled with cleanup. So that must be another side benefit.
Yeah, that's true. But that also highlights what I was saying before about childcare. Yeah. Everybody that I know that has young children, childcare is an issue, especially if it's a two-parent family and both of them have jobs through this. Neither of them have lost them. They're both kind of trying to scramble around work hours and school hours and feeding their kids lunch and cleaning them and taking care of whatever else has to be done in the household. And that's really difficult. And so I know that a number of people are looking forward to school just for the childcare aspect of it. Suddenly the kid isn't my problem. I can get back to my work or get back to my, some semblance of a life that I used to have, which doesn't mean that they don't love their kids and cherish their kids, but
sure.
It's difficult, especially with young kids. It can be extremely challenging. So we're going to see what happens with that. I sound very pessimistic, don't I?
Well, it is what it is, though. Shoot, I quoted Trump. Anyway, it's how does he just ruin phrases, right? Like make America great again. First off, he had 4 years and it still needs to be made great again, but we're not going to talk about politics. Anyway, just to kind of talk about a different medium for doing this, and this still pertains to archaeology as a field too as well. Did you ever, and I think we briefly talked about this, but I want to more specifically talk about it because I'm shocked that it hasn't come around, but did you ever try Second Life when it was getting real big?
Yeah, I did for a little bit. I didn't care for it, but I played with it a bit just to experience what it was about.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with Second Life is there was no objective. I think people had too much freedom. It's like I always think about, I equate Second Life with the Matrix movies, right? Because I think I can't remember what movie it was, but it was when the fake FBI agent was explaining to Neo, probably the first one, he was explaining how it worked. And he's like, in the beginning, we tried to create a utopia for humans, but it failed. Like they just wouldn't take to the programming. He said they all just they couldn't handle it. Like psychologically, they needed things to do. They needed adversity. They needed things to overcome and stuff to do. And just living in this utopia world, which I try not to equate that with Star Trek either, because Star Trek seems like kind of a utopia, but I actually want that one to be true. Anyway, and I think of Second Life in that way too, because there was sure, you could build stuff, you could go places, but there weren't a lot of people in there and there wasn't really anything to do. But I'm surprised in this world of Zoom calls, because like you mentioned, you don't really feel fulfilled in the way that you do with human face-to-face interactions when you're sitting on a Zoom call talking to somebody. And part of that is what we talked about in the first segment is, if it's more than one person, well, you can't have those side conversations break off because you're looking at the Brady Bunch and only one person can really be talking at a time. Now, if you have a Zoom Pro account, you can start a breakout room, but it's hard to go in and out of those, right? It's not as fluid as just having a conversation.
No, it's not as fluid. That's the thing. You say to the host, hey,
yeah,
toss so-and-so and me into a breakout room. And it's usually not because the conversation just naturally drifts that way. It's because we have to talk about something important right now. And two other people are talking about something important right now in the same room. So we have to physically go to a different breakout room. Well, physically, virtually.
Right. You can't kind of side listen to them and maybe interject or come back to it like we probably do as humans. Yeah. Now, so the other aspect that you mentioned was you just don't feel like emotionally fulfilled having a conversation with someone on a Zoom call. And even if you've got video on, there's really nothing to do. It's like, what do you do? You're sitting here. There's nothing to interact with. It's just you're staring at each other through the camera. And a lot of times people don't have the internet for that. So you don't even have the video on and it's just audio and you're just going back and forth. And when the conversation's over, you're done, you hang up, right? But with Second Life, you can do all those things. And you actually are doing other things too. Even if you're just manipulating yourself with a keyboard, you're moving around. You're at least doing something with your hands. So there's that, and you can actually turn on the microphone and physically talk to people. And the cool thing about Second Life, I haven't actually popped in probably a year. Well, I think I went in shortly after this whole COVID thing started just to see if there was like an influx of people, and there was not. But you can actually, it's got proximity volume levels. So if you're getting closer and closer to somebody, the volume gets louder and louder as you get closer to them. And it has all the things that we want in face-to-face human interactions. And yet still, it didn't explode in popularity, as I think they missed a huge opportunity for advertising personally, but it didn't explode in popularity like I would have kind of expected it to. I don't know, but I think something along those lines would probably be the answer if this were a long-term solution. I think Zoom's going to go away from that standpoint and getting into more of a virtual world, like some of those science fiction movies that have been out, and like all of the online multiplayer online programs and stuff that people have. The kids and millennials and hell 30-year-olds are just used to doing that. So
yeah, no, it's funny. You said this kind of in passing about gestures, and that was something that I noticed too, that been problematic for me on these Zoom calls. And it was also where I noticed it, in fact, was in the online conference that we did. I talk with my hands all the time. I'm half Italian. And most of the time I'm sitting close enough to the camera that my gestures are off screen. Right. You know, and when I see myself, it just looks not ridiculous in the same way that the first time you hear your recorded voice sounds, that's me. Oh my God, I sound like that. No, it just what I'm trying to convey is literally truncated because you can't see my hands because they're off screen. And so what I noticed actually in that conference was that I was giving slides, and I've given those slides. I've given a talk similar to that plenty of times. It's part of my class that I teach. Every time that I teach a class, I have slides and I'm pacing in front of those slides, and I'm like putting my hands right up on the screen, showing this and showing that, because I'm very physical about what I want to point out. I could do it with a laser pointer, but I'm just more comfortable walking up and pointing. And I kept on doing that to the presentation I was giving, which of course nobody else could see but me. And so that's a matter of training myself differently. But it's all these, it's death by a thousand cuts, all these things that are just slightly wrong or slightly different than I'm used to, that 5 months in, I still haven't gotten myself fully around. And I think it's because it's 5 months and I'm over 50. And, it's going to take another 100 years or so before I get there.
Well, and I think stuff like that, like Second Life and things like that. I mean, right now you have to log in through a computer, and if you want to speak or anything like that, you really kind of need a headset. I mean, you can use your computer speakers and microphone, but it just doesn't work very well. Right. And I think it's not going to be. It's like we need another technology to become more commonplace before stuff like that is commonplace. And I think that technology is VR. VR headsets are coming way down, but they're still in the world of gaming. When VR headsets become a part of your work life, and you guys are, you're staying at home and you're popping on a VR headset to, virtually manipulate somebody's laptop and show them how to do something, or, operating some sort of thing remotely, then, and that becomes common, then those interactions will become common. But then, we run into the problem of, all the ways in movies where that goes wrong. Like we become totally fat and lazy and live completely VR. And then you got to ask yourself, well, it's about quality of life. Do I care that my actual physical human body is wasting away in a chair somewhere where I'm having a great time in virtual reality? Is that really that big of a deal? I don't know. That's an ethical question we'll have to answer later.
Wasn't that asked in WALL-E?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And did you see the Bruce Willis one just in the last part of the segment here? What the heck was that called? Surrogates. I think it was called Surrogates, where they took it a slightly different way. It wasn't VR at all. You basically controlled an android representation of yourself, like a cyborg representation that looked exactly like you. It looked exactly human. And you don't know that at first in the movie because everybody looks perfect. But then at some point it goes to somebody in a house and it's not even like a nice house. Like it's a dirty, rundown house. And he's got like a ripped up stained t-shirt on and he's kind of pudgy and fat. And, the system's kind of taking care of your functions. But when you go to work for the day, you send your surrogate out and you don't even go out in person. And I think that's that kind of stuff and VR, either way, us staying at home is the long-term potentially very damaging thing about a pandemic. When people get used to staying at home, we get a lot of agoraphobia and people just, technology like that ends up becoming the norm. I think we'd have to be in a pandemic for several years for that to really become part of our culture. But yeah, who knows? Anyway, let's bring this back to technology and archaeology in the third segment. So we're going to take a break real quick and we'll come back and talk about that back in a second.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose. To serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Welcome back to the final segment of episode 135 of the Archaeotech podcast. And we've been kind of doing a work from home assessment, but we're going to transition a little bit but not really because still working from home, but talking about, planning and I guess managing projects and data for archaeology. And we're going to talk about something big that came up for me in the last couple of days, but even on a slightly smaller scale, I've got about a 7,500 acre survey that we're going to do, theoretically into this month, but we're still waiting on the lead agency to give a scope of work for this. We're supposed to have it 2 weeks ago. So we'll see if this even happens this year, because in this particular area, even though it's 100 degrees in Reno today, it will be, and this is in northeastern Nevada, it'll be covered in snow by mid-October. So there's no way we'll be able to get out there. Or the rains usually come in end of September, early October. And when that happens, you can't even drive on those roads, really. It's a mine, so you can drive on the haul roads, but we often need the side roads and things like that, and it just becomes undoable and unsafe. And if you want to know about unsafe driving on roads, listen to the last episode, I think it was 195 of the Sierra Mark podcast, where one of our co-hosts, Heather, talked about flipping over a vehicle and the lessons learned from that. And they're lucky they walked out alive, to be honest.
Lesson number 1, don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I'm trying to navigate some things. Being a digital archaeologist, if that's still a thing, but being a digital archaeologist is actually helpful because I can remotely control all the data. I don't have to have any physical interaction with my crews. I don't have to hand them paper. I don't have to receive paper from them. I'm not handing them tablets. They're using their own devices to record. So I'm not concerned with cleaning them at the end of the day, doing all that stuff. They are who they are. And ideally on this short project that I'm going to do in a few weeks, I'm still struggling with how to do this legally, but ideally, they'd have their own vehicles as well. But that really does limit my pool of people that have access to this because they need to have Mine Safety and Health Administration training or MSHA training, and they need to have a high clearance 4-wheel drive vehicle. And more than likely, they're going to need to be able to camp out on site too with us. So I need like one more person that can do that. I've got 2, and I need like one more that can do that. But that's a really strict list of qualifications. And really the separate vehicle thing is just for COVID. I don't want to have to stress somebody out over being in a sweaty vehicle with people breathing up a storm at the end of a hot day of survey. And we'll have hand sanitizer all over the place and wipes everywhere, but I don't want somebody to have that be a stress point for them. So the way to cover that is just bring your own vehicle. But I can't cover your vehicle on my insurance. and that becomes an issue. If you run into a haul truck, if you live and run into a haul truck, or you damage something on the mine, or you damage your own vehicle, you're kind of on your own. And I'm not really sure where my professional responsibility comes in on that. And I'm not sure I want to put that stress on people either. So, we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, that sounds like a complicated process trying to deal with that. I hadn't even thought of individuals' auto insurance.
Right.
Oof.
Yeah. It all comes down to it, man. I've got $4 million in general liability, and I've got my own auto policies, of course. Mm-hmm. And my general liability actually covers auto accidents as well if something happens on a client's project, right? So if I forget to take my car out of park and don't put it in the little stops at the front of the mine office and it rolls into a building, I'm covered. I'm totally covered. And my general liability covers me if I screw up the project and they plow over a National Register site and I didn't recognize it. It also covers me there, for up to $4 million if they decide to sue me. So that's why I have that, but I can't expect my techs to have that. Right. You know what I mean? I can't expect them to be covered by that. And I'm going to have them on my payroll. So the only way they would even be really covered under their own policy is if they were a 1099 contractor, which I also can't do. So yeah, it's complicated. So speaking of complicated, though, this is a small project. This is a 7,500 acre survey that's probably going to take, and actually we're knocking out some of it. We don't have the numbers on this yet, but it's going to be significant because we don't have to survey. We can spot survey as we see fit on greater than 30% slope. But generally, we're going to mathematically remove everything that's 30% slope or more, which is a lot. I'm thinking it's going to cut the acreage in half. And then we can just spot survey it. If we see something that we think needs to be looked at, it's probably going to be like a mining feature or something like that. That's a relatively small project. Now, yesterday I got word of a project that I'm going to bid on with a prime that I've worked with before for a 133,000 acre survey. And just trying to logistically figure out the data needs for this project is massive. I mean, and there's a lot at stake here. I'm only doing the field work and the site record preparation, and I'm helping with the report as well. Not the full report. That's what the primer's doing. But obviously there's the site record data that goes in the report. We're responsible for that. Some of the field data collection methods, things like that. All those are sections of the report. But just the field work and that portion, which the field work is always the biggest cost of a project, but just the field work is coming out to be about $2.4 million. And that's a ton of money. And there's a lot of liability there. There's a lot of things to think about. And if we don't think about our data collection strategies right off the bat, I probably have about 7 or 8 months if we win this project to actually figure this out and come up with a good plan for it. But we need to have it solid before we start. Absolutely solid. So that's where I'm at right now. That's where my head's at.
So how many of those details have to be in the original proposal, and how many can you work on afterwards?
Well, here's the thing. It's a government contract and it's a special situation. So really none of it has to be in the proposal, because the only thing that needs to be in a proposal is a giant number on a single sheet of paper. And whichever number is lower is going to win. But our first responsibility is to put together a project action plan. And they've even got about 6 months listed out for us to actually put that together. And that information is going to have to be in the action plan. So I'll have probably until next spring to really figure out. And honestly, I don't need until next spring. I mean, I've done projects like this before. And this is the nice thing about already being digital is it's scalable. And that's huge. This is scalable to almost any size if you've got the right software that you're going to use, the right applications and the right plan for it. It doesn't matter if I record 2 sites or 500 sites, or I do 100 acres versus 100,000 acres. It's totally scalable. Or if I have 2 people versus 50 people, it's still scalable. And that's what's nice about this approach.
So what kinds of things are you looking at in terms of the tech that you're going to need to bring to bear that might be new or unusual, or, what, because you've used a lot of different tech in the field in the past.
Yeah.
What are the challenges that you're being presented with right now that are ones that you hadn't, had to grapple with before, or have new options for how you deal with them?
Well, I'll tell you, my biggest problem is GIS. And the reason for that is my brain just wants to default to the easy thing, which is rent Trimbles, right? And because I don't own Trimbles, I'd have to rent them. In fact, in this case, I might just buy the Trimbles, because if I get this project, I'm probably going to have to get a loan for, well, if they give us milestone payments, I probably wouldn't have to get more than $500,000 or so, but I'd have to get a loan for something to start the project, to start covering payroll. And then if they are paying us milestones, then I can, continue to get money in the bank to keep going payroll. But the biggest thing, one of the big costs is Trimbles. And if I look at it, your average Trimble rental is about $90 a day. And if I look at $180 per day, and I calculated it out to about 217 person days with an 8-person crew, that's $40,000 just in Trimble rentals. So Yeah. So looking at that, and I hate to Trimble, right? I don't want to use it, right? We're fully digital with the tablets and things like that. And that's one of my biggest concerns, is that this stuff is changing so rapidly. So everybody knows that I use WildNote for my field data collection, and I work for WildNote. So full disclosure, I don't do a whole lot right now, but I'm on their advisory and, all that stuff. So they've got me on retainer to talk about CRM stuff. And in fact, if you're hearing this now, head over to WildNote or it's one of my resources. I'll have the link for it, but I'm doing a lunch and learn on CRM and digital data collection with them on Wednesday, the 25th, I think that is. Whatever that Wednesday is. Take a look at those resources because you'll see that by the time this comes out. So anyway, one of the big challenges I have is trying to figure out whether or not the tech I need is going to be there, right? And WildNote recently just gave support for the EOS Arrow Bluetooth recording device, right? Bluetooth antenna. Now, that's great, but it doesn't really do me a whole lot of good from a WildNote standpoint, because all that does is it gets me sub-meter accuracy on my photographs, on my single point lat long points, and then I can export those as files that I can open up in a GIS. But it doesn't allow me, WildNote doesn't have mapping capabilities. So my other problem is, what am I going to map with? What am I going to do? Datums and points and polygons, features, artifacts, boundaries, stuff like that. What am I going to do that with? And the most commonly used thing out there is Collector, right? But you can't really use Collector effectively unless you have an ArcGIS license to just bring it up into Esri, which of course I'm not going to pay for. So, and I wouldn't give them money even if I had $1 billion in the bank right now. I'd rather just use QGIS, right?
Right.
So Collector's out. And there's a couple others. There's Gaia, which I've seen before. TouchGIS, which I mentioned, I think, in the last one.
Yeah, you did. I actually, this is a practical suggestion for you in particular, Chris, but we had a guest on a year and a half or so ago, Edward Gonzalez-Tennant, and he's started up a YouTube channel, Archaeology, with all sorts of 2-minute videos of QGIS tips.
Nice.
So for you, Chris, I would suggest that you talk to him and see if he's got any good suggestions for how you could solve these problems using QGIS, because I think he's pretty good at it. And, he likes sharing the knowledge. So, that might be a good resource for you to call on.
Yeah, because I spent an hour this morning trying to change the symbol on a map. I suck at it. I'm not good at all. I have a passing knowledge of GIS, and it's one of those things where, man, I use it when I have to, but I've never really sat down and took the time to just understand fundamentally how it all works. I took a graduate class in it in college, and I still just struggle with it every time I have to get in there. I don't know why. It's one of those things that just hasn't clicked with me. I don't use it every day either. I use it 3 times a year.
Yeah, that's probably the reason.
That doesn't help. Anyway, we'll find that link and put that in the show notes, and I'll definitely check some of that stuff out because I could probably use it. I love those little quick tips. So I don't need a 10-minute video for you to get 6 minutes in and tell me the thing that I looked for in the title.
Right.
I need quick tips. So yeah, GIS is a problem. How are we going to do our mapping? I mentioned that app TouchGIS for iOS, which I absolutely love, but I need to do more research on it to see if it'll pull in. If it'll pull in EOS Arrow data, I'm done. That's it. That's my solution, right? That's how we're going to do this, and that will be fantastic, because one of the things that I think people don't understand, I always tell them when they're buying tablets that if they want to use the GPS on the tablet, they have to get a cellular enabled tablet, at least for iOS. I think most Androids are the same way, or Android based tablets. But if you want an iPad and you want a GPS antenna, you have to get the cellular enabled one. You don't have to get a cellular plan, but it has to be cellular enabled because the antennas they come together as a package. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that's true if you're using an external GPS antenna. I don't think that matters. I think it still has the code inside to be able to read those coordinates. And so you can buy a cheaper tablet if you need to.
Yeah, just so long as it can talk to that external antenna.
Right. Yeah, because all the info is coming through Bluetooth, and the antenna on the antenna is the thing that is reading the GPS signal. So yeah, I actually never really thought about that out loud before, but that totally makes sense. So anyway, TouchGIS is an amazing application, and if I can use something like that, that's a game changer, right? That'll change anything. Now, the one downside to TouchGIS, as far as I can tell, and there may be a solution to this, I just don't have enough experience with it yet, is I need to get everybody on the same feature set, right? On the same data dictionary, as Trimble would call it. So I need to make sure the same people are calling things the same thing, because I don't think I can take all my settings that I have developed for, my glass features, my metal, my prehistoric projectile points, flakes, stuff like that, all the symbology that I've created. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I can export those settings and import them into another one. If I can, that'll be great. But if I can't, I need to make sure. And that's another problem people have with field tech is I've seen companies with 2 Trimbles out there, and they have 2 completely different data dictionaries in them, and different symbologies, different recording methods, and people are doing different file names every day, and there's no systemization to it, right? And then when it gets to the GIS department, this is why the GIS department costs so much money, because it takes them so long just to determine what the hell the field crews did.
Right.
So that's another thing you got to think about is, you've got 8 people out there, all potentially collecting GIS data on their own devices, all collecting textual and photographic data on their own devices. So the first thing I need to do on this project is have a really strong training plan, and then a really strong, for the first few weeks, just tell them, say, listen, we're not micromanaging you, but we're going to look at literally everything you do for the next 2 weeks to make sure you're doing it right. And there's just no way around that.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's one of the things back in the 90s when I worked at MASCA at University of Pennsylvania. We had our own software for surveying. And when we trained people how to use it, total station surveying, when we trained people how to use it, that was the first thing we'd do, is not just tell them how to, make machine go bing and shoot lasers, but also how to actually categorize their things, how to think about the data they were expecting to collect at a particular site, so that they could build categories and subcategories, so that once they pulled it into their mapping software, it was already categorized for them. I mean, it's as old as computers, garbage in, garbage out. But that's really, I'm to this day convinced that if you're going to do a project, that's the first thing you have to do, is try to think of your categorization and your nomenclature and that kind of stuff before you actually get out there. Otherwise, you're going to spend far more time cleaning up because somebody spelled something in an alternate way, or they didn't subclassify something in a way that you wanted, but in a different way that made sense to them and doesn't work with your project. Or, I don't even have to go through different examples. You certainly know, but that's where you're going to find a lot of problems. And that if you think through it, that's where you're going to preempt a lot of problems.
Well, and expanding on that, there's a lot of machismo in archaeology. You need to check your freaking ego at the door, because you might be Paul Zimmerman, PhD, having done this for decades, but you might not think of everything, right? So crowdsource it. Get some people together.
I have not thought of everything.
Right. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with my wife about this particular project just in the last couple. I found out about it literally yesterday. So we've had a lot of conversations about this already. And even though she hasn't been like full-time in archaeology for probably 7 years, she's got a lot of good insight to this just because she's outside of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so when it really comes down to it, I'm going to have a lot of conversations with the prime. There's 2 very experienced archaeologists that are working there that are going to be on this project. And I would, just even if they take all my suggestions and we say, yeah, that's 100% what we're going to do from a data collection and storage standpoint, it's at least not just me coming up with this and saying this is what we're going to do and then have it not work in the future, right? I've done that before, as partly because in the past, there was nobody to talk to about digital data collection of field information. And now there's a lot more people doing it. So a lot of times in the past, I had to just kind of make it up and see if it works. And to be honest, that China Lake project I did, and the one before that down in El Centro, we were using tap forms. And I've talked about this before. We were using tap forms, and if I were ever using something like that again, there's a lot of different ways I would do it. I think we're still very successful in our efficiency, but there's a lot of different ways I would do that now. But there was no one to talk to about it because no one else was using it. No one else was doing it. And so I just kind of had to make it up. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And I took all the suggestions from my field crews too, even though they had never used anything like that. And most of them had never even digitally recorded in the field. At the end of the session or at the end of the day, even, I would be like, what worked and what didn't? What are your first impressions? Cause I need people who know nothing about this to tell me what they think about it. And then we can work on it and improve the system. So I think that's the big lesson on all this stuff is just, crowdsource it, talk to other people that have done it, and then try to improve as you go along. But for a big project like this, I kind of need to make all those decisions ahead of time because we're going to be not able to make any real major decisions on our collection methodology once we start because of the client. So they're going to expect regularity and, some consistency.
So you preempt as many problems as possible. You check your ego at the door. You listen to people who actually have to use the software and the systems that you're designing. You kill your babies if you have to.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And move forward as best you can like that. But that's really kind of, I don't know that I've ever worked on a project where once we settled on a methodology, it was set in stone. So that's going to be an interesting challenge. I don't know how common that is in CRM, but in academic archaeology, there's more of a fluidity to how you do things once you realize that something is inadequate for whatever reason.
Right. I mean, it just really is, just in the last minute here, it really is hard to change. And I know that from working with WildNote and working with, I mean, if you're doing a change in procedure, that's one thing. But if you need to change forms on your fields on your form or something like that, you run into a huge data problem because WildNote won't even let you do that for obvious reasons. You've got data collected against those fields. So if you're like, well, instead of a single select, this needs to be a multi-select. It's like, okay, well, you're gonna have to make a new question. And now you have to decide, am I just going to add this question there because I can't delete the single select question? But in reality, you're probably going to duplicate the form and make a new one. And now you've got two different forms on this project that have basically the same name and information. And if you don't, it's best to try to head that stuff off before you get out there. And I know that sometimes isn't easy, but yeah, luckily this is a Nevada project. So the Nevada IMAX forms are not something I can't even change. Right. So that takes that part of it out for me, just like the California ones. You can't change those. You can't add to them. You can't take away from them. They're agency forms. Right. And there's some sort of comforting blanket that comes over you when you think about that. Even though I hate the agency forms, it's nice not having to make my own. So, all right. Well, this has been a great conversation. I didn't feel like we had a whole lot to talk about when we came into the recording today, Paul, but I feel like we could keep going for another hour.
Oh, easily. I mean, there's so many questions around designing projects. And then also, like I said, applying what we've learned over this last half a year. Wow. It could go a bunch of different directions. Yeah. But hey, let's just keep this in our back pocket for sometime in the future.
Well, yeah. And if we win this, then we'll probably have a lot more conversations and maybe I'll help my own project out and we'll bring some experts on in areas where I need help and hopefully other people can get help too. And we'll just, try to work out some solutions to problems before they happen and try to figure it out. I'd love to bring somebody on who's done some massive large scale surveys from a digital collection standpoint and just get their, pick their brain on it. So maybe if that's you and you're listening, then, hit us up on the podcast. So
yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for listening and hit us up if you've done any large projects like this or want to talk about anything else. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And remember, everybody out there, keep safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, especially to keep everybody around you safe, and just keep that social distance. I hope we all get through this.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your sites will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
Get 15% off a set of BrakeMess Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.